Hello. There we go. That's better. I don't know what happened there. Hey, everybody, hope you're good. Hope you, like I say, welcome along to Paranormal Monkey Podcast. Hope you've had a good week, and like I say, all of last week, and hope you've had a good Monday. So, okay, it's going to be a bit of a slightly controversial one, maybe slightly controversial. Haunted dolls. So, whatever your feelings, and I've got feelings as well about haunted dolls, you might be there going, "Come on, come on." But we're going to be delving into this subject matter. So we have the lovely Fiona Dodwell. Good evening, Fiona.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, really good. So, like I said, it might be a bit controversial. Some people might be there going, "Oh no, really? Come on!" But we're gonna go. We're gonna go. There's loads and loads of things to talk about. But before we go any further, do you just want to give everybody a little bit of introduction about yourself and just say anything, who you are, where you're from, and why you're interested in this particular subject matter.
Yeah, so basically I've had a bit of an obsession with the paranormal and all kinds of spooky stuff since I was a child, really. I grew up obsessed with like ghost stories and, like the point horror books that they released back in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And Goosebumps and all of that sort of stuff. It just really kind of excited me, really. I loved anything creepy. I was drawn to it. And as I got older, like as a teenager, I really started to read kind of more serious literature about the subject and visiting haunted locations, graveyards, all sorts of kind of like dark and creepy stuff. And then as time went on, there was one aspect of the paranormal that just really drew me in, and it was this whole idea of objects being haunted and whether that was possible, and if so, how that happened. And it kind of really kicked up a notch in 2015 with Peggy the doll. And that case really stuck with me, and it kind of just stuck in my brain. And I thought one day I'm really going to have to delve into this subject and really throw myself into it. And that's kind of how I've reached the point I'm at today with releasing my book, A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls. That's book is basically a culmination of all my kind of research and my looking into that subject and just kind of collecting it and putting it out in this volume for people to read and see what they think of it.
So this is Fiona's book. There it is, A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls. This is what we're going to be mainly focusing on and everything that Fiona's been researching and looking into. So, Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, from real life to literature and movies. There's a lot to unpick with this subject matter. And there'll be some people in the chat going, "Yeah, fully. Why not? The paranormal is one of those places where anything is possible."
Yeah.
There'll be some people there going, "I think I've got a haunted doll, or I've owned a haunted doll in the past, where some things seem to happen after I purchased it in my home, and then it went when I got rid of it." I have been to places where, and Diane in the chat, one of my mods, will know that this time last year, we went to the Museum of Curiosities, filming for the Supernatural UK, where I was presented with a whole store full of haunted dolls, and I had to hold them and talk to them. And to be honest, I felt, and you see, if you watch the program, it is one of those things where I was like, come on, this is ridiculous. But it is. I mean, it definitely divides people, this whole thing. Why do you think it divides people so much? Because the whole haunted doll thing is massive.
It is massive. But one of the things that I wanted to do when I wrote this book actually was to ask people to take a look at it and take it seriously, like they have with other aspects of the paranormal. Because I know from my own experience, as soon as I mention to somebody I'm writing or researching haunted dolls, you get a look from somebody, or they laugh, they think, are you being serious?
Yeah.
And while I can kind of understand where they're coming from, I feel like there's such a wealth of material and interesting cases and experiences out there that warrant looking at and having a bit of respect, like we do with other aspects of the paranormal. So I just kind of ask people to think about the idea that we're more open-minded to thinking a room or a house or a staircase or a plot of land can be haunted, but as soon as you say an object can have some kind of energy, we're like, whoa, that's ridiculous. But to me, it's not a jump. There's not a massive mental jump for me to think, well, if a room can be haunted, then why can't an object that somebody loved and owned and cherished be haunted, or some kind of psychic imprint from somebody? I feel like there's enough evidence out there for at least to be looked at and taken
Yeah.
seriously. So it would just be nice to remove some of that judgment, at least temporarily. And if people look into it further and they're still not convinced, then that's fine. Like with all aspects of the paranormal, you're not there to convince everybody, but I do feel like there's enough out there now for it to be looked at and
Yeah.
at least weighed up with, like we do with other aspects of the paranormal.
Obviously, you said that you really got going when you was looking into Peggy the doll, which we'll talk about Peggy a bit later on, because obviously once owned by Jane Harris, the people might know from Jane Harris from Help My House Is Haunted and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But where do you think this? I mean, I know that people have been associating dolls with spirits, and you can going way back, whether that's voodoo dolls or however. But where do you think this kind of idea stems from, where we're linking a spirit to a doll?
Yeah, I mean, I think it traces so far back in humanity that, like, there's evidence of humans being drawn to dolls, and not just in a kind of in a playful way. As you mentioned, there's evidence of wooden dolls in ancient Egypt
Yeah.
as far back as like 2000 BC, and you have ancient Greek brides that used to offer up dolls to gods to kind of bring upon blessings to their marriage. And like you mentioned, voodoo dolls and ritualistic purposes. And I think it's, from what I can see, it's because we know that when we're looking at a doll, we are seeing a reflection of a human being. We're looking at something that represents a human. So it makes sense that in a ritual purpose, for example, or even if a spirit is to inhabit a vessel in a kind of conduit, for example, then it makes sense that that would be something that looks distinctly human. There's something about that that kind of draws us in, I think, more than any other object.
Yeah, I can kind of get that, because I think in psychology, where they're saying, well, anything which is human-like but slightly not human just weirds us out. Basically, it just like
Yeah,
the whole thing of a whole concept of glass eyes and it reflecting back, and it's just like, well, it's human but not human, and it's alive not live. See, kids don't seem to have an issue with dolls. Children don't have an issue. It's adults that have an issue with dolls,
we
seemingly.
do. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
At what point do you think that changes from childhood, where children quite happy playing with dolls, not a problem? When you become an adult, is it because of a cultural thing? Is it because of the movies? Is it because of books? Is it things we've read? Is that the reason why we get freaked out by looking at dolls?
I do certainly think that the cultural influence of, like the entertainment world hasn't helped in that regard, because you see films like Dolly Dearest and Child's Play, and even far back as like the 1920s, like we had examples of like ventriloquist dummies and that kind of thing. We see that, and it's hard for it not to seep into our consciousness, if you know what I mean, and make that kind of influence. We make that kind of connection once it's there. But then I also think that adults find dolls creepy anyway. So
Yeah.
even outside of that paranormal link, there is, as you mentioned, the whole sort of being watched by a doll, the lifelike eyes, the detail, especially in some of the vintage and antique dolls. Some of them are incredible and can look really lifelike. I think there's just something about that psychologically that unnerves us, even if you're not to go down the avenue of is this item haunted. Just looking at a human like vessel in itself can be something that can be triggering to some people.
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, you mentioned about we'll go into kind of some dolls that have been involved in films. We'll talk about Child's Play particularly as well, because that was, I think it became mass. The whole Child's Play thing was a bit of a phenomena. But I want to start with the one that freaked me out most as a kid.
Yeah.
This film, right? Hang on, let's come on, wakey. This film, Anthony Hopkins, Fats the Doll, and the film that's called Magic. I don't know if you've not seen this film. It's pretty old now, but I think this was the first ventriloquist doll film that really freaked me out. I don't know. It was just weird.
It was
No,
very weird. I agree.
yeah. I mean, when you was researching your book, did you have to watch these old movies just to kind of remind yourself of these kinds of how these dolls were kind of shown in film?
Yeah, I did. And, it was a lot of fun for me, as somebody who likes creepy things and who likes horror films. I actually enjoyed diving into some of the older films and examples of this kind of thing, like because I was coming across films that I hadn't necessarily seen before, but that I'd heard of. So it was quite fun actually to take a look at some of them. And Magic is a film that I've seen a couple of times now. So, you know, as you mentioned, it is very creepy. And this, you know, that was in 1978 that film was released. And I think it was a really great example of how looking at something so lifelike taking on this whole personality of its own can really absolutely petrify somebody.
Yeah.
And as an audience, you're seeing this thing that you know is inanimate, you know it's not actually alive, but you're seeing it develop and take on a form of its own and a whole identity, and that's really an unnerving experience as in the audience, definitely.
Yeah. I'm gonna say, and actually, ventriloquist dolls particularly,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's because of the act of ventriloquism itself, but it, you know, there's something particular. I mean, I think Dead Silence is another great film, which
Yeah,
includes ventriloquist dolls. What is it about ventriloquist dolls, particularly, do you think, that freak people out?
I'm not sure, but it's interesting because I'm somebody who actually does like dolls and antique dolls, vintage dolls, and I collect them myself. You know, not even in this like paranormal sense, like, just as collector's items. You know, I collect these sorts of things, and I have, you know, a lot of them around my house and even in my bedroom because I'm a bit strange like that. But it's one of the things that's always unnerved me is ventriloquist dummies. So, you know, I remember being very young, maybe sort of, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, and my dad used to, you know, put this film on telly. I can't even remember what it was now, but it had a few scenes of a dummy in it, a ventriloquist dummy, and just to tease me, he used to rewind it to that scene and put it on, and it used to like drive me mad, and I'd run out the room. And it sounds cruel, doesn't it? But he was, you know, he found it really funny, and but there was just something about it, and I don't know, I don't know if it's the appearance, those kind of like larger than life eyes and features
Yeah.
just seem really almost kind of grotesque in a way. And then I think you have that whole idea really that's explored about how this seemingly inanimate object is kind of stealing an identity from the person that's supposed to be controlling it, actually that it's in control in the end, if that makes,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely. So, Child's Play. Now, the phenomena of Chucky. Now, part of this, that, you know, during your book, you was actually able to interview and chat with Don Mancini, who's the writer and director of Child's Play.
Yeah.
Um, so how did you go about that? Kind of when you know, did you obviously, what did you have in mind in terms of where you wanted to take the conversation with him and the phenomenon of Chucky?
Well, it was a really big deal to me actually because, you know, I've been obsessed with the Child's Play films and the Chucky character for as long as I can remember. And so when Don agreed to kind of talk to me, you know, I was like absolutely, you know, completely amazed, you know, because he's a legend in my eyes, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of a horror film, like it doesn't get better than that for me. And he was, you know, he was wonderful. I approached him and I didn't, it was just more of like a general chat, really. I just wanted his general feelings on how he felt now at this stage, you know, because the franchise has come so far and we even have the TV series. So I just thought it was an interesting time to kind of pick Don's brain and just ask him how he felt about that, the whole history of Chucky and how it had developed and
I
how
was
huge it had become, you
I
know.
was going to say, like, in terms of how when he first started writing, what did he take as his kind of reference, or you know, how did he want to start the idea of this Chucky doll coming to life and murdering people? Where did that come from?
Well, he actually mentioned at one point, because there was all sorts of like myths that kind of grow on the internet about where did Don get these ideas and where was Chucky based on. But actually, Don mentioned that one of the biggest things that stuck in his mind was when he was younger, and it was the Cabbage Patch craze.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah,
Oh yes, I remember it well.
yes, me too. And he said that there was something about seeing like this massive cultural thing where children were suddenly obsessed with this toy. You know, these dolls were like the thing that you had to have, and then you saw footage of parents kind of like trying desperately to get in stores and be the one to get the last one on the shelf, and
Yeah,
you know, this whole kind of doll craze. And he said that there was something about that kind of planted a seed in his mind about this whole, you know, the doll that you must have and what that represented, and that seemed to trigger something to him. So, you know, he said that was one of the first things that kind of took root in his mind was actually the Cabbage Patch Kids doll, and they were kind of creepy looking back. I mean, I had a couple when I was younger, but when you think about them now, there is something a little bit
They're ugly. They're really ugly.
they're strange looking.
I never understood the Cabbage Patch doll craze because it was insanely mad, where
It was,
people were just trying to, you know, tearing through Toys R Us to try and get hold of the latest Cabbage Patch doll and things. It was, it was a phenomena. Really, it was mad. Why
yeah,
people going
absolutely.
straight for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had Child's Play. Now, I wasn't in terms of Child's Play. I don't think I mean, I just found it a little bit silly. But
Hmm.
this next doll freaked me out in movies. This doll, really,
Yeah.
I hated this doll so much from the film Poltergeist, obviously.
Hmm.
So that we have got this wonderful combination of, not only is it a doll that comes to life, it's the doll of a clown, which doubles up the fear factor. I
Absolutely.
mean, you know, it, it's. I mean, the combination of those two things. I mean, this clown again. I think a lot of children were traumatized by this thing.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I think if it wasn't bad enough to kind of, like you said, with people are unnerved by dolls in themselves, aren't they, and find them creepy. But I think for a lot of people, clowns are a whole other level, and clowns are a step too far for some people, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it is bad.
and there's
And
definitely something very, very, yeah, creepy about Poltergeist, and that, that kind of the face of that clown and the kind of maniac eyes that he has.
yeah, yeah, the mania of what's going on. Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I suppose the shot of, where it goes from him being on the chair, and then then obviously it's not there anymore, and again plays into our fears that dolls can move, which
Yeah.
when we go into some real, what's alleged real life cases, that's kind of a theme, that the dolls can move on their own. That's really common. It's
Uh,
not just that they're possessed, that they can actually move around themselves.
yeah, which is very petrifying, isn't it? Because I think that's one of the things, like, we have dolls and clowns and these kind of items in all of our homes across the world. Adults collect them, they have porcelain dolls on their shelves, children play with them, grandparents have them in the little toy box when their grandkids visit. So many homes just have these innocent looking toys. So once you make that link in your head, actually, could this stuff happen? Is this real? It kind of makes you realize that, we all have them in our homes. In what
Yeah.
it kind of opens that can of worms, and it's not a very nice thought.
And obviously the whole Megan idea brings things right up to date with using things like AI and robotics and things like that. But it's still essentially the same kind of story, isn't it? That this thing can take on a life of its own.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with Megan. I mean, I really enjoyed that film, and I did question, oh, should I include an entry in her in the book, because she wasn't a traditional doll. But
Yeah.
as you pointed out, you still have that kind of doll-like appearance, the human vessel, that kind of representation of a person. So I thought it was definitely worth mentioning in the book.
Yeah.
And like you said, it gives it that modern twist as well with AI. So
And so we come across now a bit of a crossover between movies and reality, and I suppose the most famous one is the Annabelle doll.
mhm.
Okay, now now there'll be a lot of people in the chat that are going, "Oh, come on, it was just a made-up story." That they'll have massive reservations around the whole story, around Ed and Lorraine Warren in itself, and then they might go, "Well, the Annabelle movies were okay, but the story of Annabelle was just nonsense." So, what's your take on the whole Annabelle doll?
My take, as much like with any case that you're not personally involved in, and that you can't make that personal verification for it, like with anything you research, you can only go by what you're reading, what you're finding in your research, by your gut instinct. And I know that Ed and Lorraine Warren are very divisive and controversial figures.
Yeah,
They're perceived that way for various reasons, but at the very least, they brought the whole subject of haunted objects to the forefront of the paranormal, and that in itself is a valuable thing. Now, with the Annabelle case, I find the case fascinating. I think there was a lot of people who were wary of Ed and Lorraine and therefore kind of wanted to just push the whole case to the side and kind of bin it, if you know what I mean, just
Yeah.
kind of dismiss it. And I understand that, you know, there are mixed opinions. I personally found that the case persisted because there perhaps was genuine experiences with people around that doll back in the 70s. Now, I'm not going to say, you know, you have stories even up till the last few months, as you know, Annabelle going on tour and these bad things happening.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you always have to be aware, don't you? We're going to look at things with bias now, and there are always going to be people who say, well, you know, this bad thing is happening, that, you know, this fire happened in the building, and this awful tragedy of Dan Rivera who passed away. You know, people are going to attribute that to the Annabelle curse as well. So I do think that you have to tread carefully with that, because you are looking for that bias, you are looking for your own confirmation. But I think in terms of going back to the source story, and the experiences of Donna and how she called on priests for help and how she found the doll unsettling and frightening, I do think that there is some validity to the initial experiences that Donna had.
Yeah.
But you know, much like anyone, you're looking at a historical case. You go, you know, I wasn't there. None of us, you know, were there. So you can only go by what you're finding and what your own feelings are on the subject. So it's not one that you can kind of put a conclusive answer on. You know,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
frustrating, but in a way that makes her legend persist, because there is that whole grey area there with Annabelle.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the truth is, I mean, some people are, and to this day with the tours and things, freaked out and fearful of, you know, Annabelle and actually any doll, because I mean, this next one, which I know you did a lot of research into, Peggy the doll,
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing of not only frightening people but can actually physically harm people,
Yeah.
you know, is the main thing, with the main story that surrounded Peggy. So do you want to talk about a little bit about your research into Peggy, and obviously you managed to speak to her owner Jane about this, you know, all the research you've done on this doll particularly?
Yeah, I mean, this was the case for me that was the most fascinating one, because although I was drawn to like researching Robert the doll and Annabelle, there was something like really quite shocking about seeing a case unfolding in modern times, like
Yeah.
as you know, in live time. So, you know, when the Peggy story unfolded, and I think that was sort of in 2015, when Peggy's owner said that they felt like there was some kind of negative energy around her. They were experiencing kind of some really like negative bad luck and nightmares, and they just felt like this was all connected to the doll somehow.
Yeah.
And they called in Jane Harris, who is one of the team on Help My House is Haunted, the TV show. And at the time, Jane Harris was really involved in studying haunted objects, and she became involved and she took the doll with her because the owner didn't even want the doll in the house anymore. And Jane did her own investigations and spent a lot of time kind of doing her own sort of like studies on Peggy the doll, and she came to her own conclusion that there was certainly an energy, and quite a dark energy, involved with Peggy. And what was particularly fascinating about this case is it wasn't just like hearing one person's account, one person's story. So you had the original owner of Peggy who said their experiences were linked to the doll. You then had Jane Harris, who stepped in and then felt she could verify that there was something paranormal going on with the doll. And furthermore than that, once Peggy started making headlines, there were people saying that they were affected by Peggy, even just from seeing like her picture, for example. So don't, you know, good luck to everyone watching this tonight, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that was one of the things, you know, if you that, you know, where there were like warnings. I mean, I know that
Yeah.
eventually Zach Bagans bought Peggy for his haunted museum in Las Vegas, and
Yes.
I mean, I
Yeah.
remember when he did a programmer, he was warning people on Ghost Adventures, the TV show, about do not, you know, warning people not to look into her eyes, otherwise you may
Yeah.
become affected. And
Yeah.
it, I mean, I mean, it's
It became massive, like a
yeah, exactly.
thing. And there were even people like saying that they'd seen her photo or they'd read about her and that they felt ill afterwards, or that they just felt like they were having bad luck. And it was ever since, like, learning about her or spending time studying her and all this sort of stuff. And it kind of grew and grew. And that case really just kind of, that's what fascinated me, because it's so multi-layered. So, you had the original owner with the experiences, you had Jane with her experiences, and then you had members of the public saying, well, actually, even from seeing her or learning about her, I feel like there's some kind of energy too. And the case grew and grew.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, like, Zach Bagans purchased Peggy in the end, and Peggy's in his museum. And I'd love to go and visit her myself, because she's just a doll that fascinates me. But I've had many people actually say to me, was I nervous about writing about dolls like Peggy and Robert? Was I not worried about kind of drawing negativity to me?
Yeah.
But
I mean,
it wasn't something that I was too worried about, because
but when you kind of hear these reports, so I mean, one of the things about Peggy is meant to be somebody who's meant to have had a heart attack when they looked into her eyes or something along those lines. And are you trying to just? I mean, do you, when you kind of research this, do you kind of do it kind of like, do you do it dispassionately and just think, okay, right, well, that's somebody's account and I just have to record that account, or do you have personal feelings around Peggy particularly?
well, for the most part with Peggy, and I'd say this is how I approached it with the other cases in the book, is that what I wanted to do was, even aside from my personal feelings, what I wanted to do was examine a whole series of cases like Peggy, and just put together the information I could gather, some research, some facts about them, and then present them in a kind of I guess in a neutral way. I mean, I do state in the book that I am a believer in the paranormal, and I believe in its possibility of an object being haunted, but I present the cases as what is available information and the sources that are out there, and let the person decide how they feel. It's not something that I put a great deal of my own personal opinion in the case. I wanted to kind of collect it in almost as a guide to present to others, for them to then take on board.
To kind of look into it for themselves. Absolutely,
yeah. That's that's my main approach. But
just
sorry, go.
Just very briefly, Kaza, thank you so much for the gifted memberships. I have noticed. Thank you so much. And I'll say, and I know people in the chat have done this already, but if you manage to get one of those memberships, make sure you give Kaza a massive great thank you. Okay, so we had Peggy the doll, and I know we're trying to go through this quite quickly, which I apologize for, because I'm sure we could spend a whole episode talking about Peggy the doll, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But then we have this doll, Harold. Now then, I mean, I remember seeing images of Harold. I know a little bit about Harold, but you again, you've done a lot of research into Harold particularly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what can you tell me about Harold the doll? I mean, he looks this poor state, bless him.
He does, yeah. So he's a doll that's a composition doll from the 1930s, and he wasn't in good condition, really. He's sort of like falling apart, really, and that's how he was when his owner Anthony Quinata purchased him. So I became kind of, I wouldn't say friends, but like acquaintances with Anthony. He was the person who decided to purchase Harold and kind of examine and investigate whether Harold was haunted, because that was the claims around this doll at the time. So this was also in 2015, actually. So Anthony purchased Harold on a eBay, the auction site, I think half expecting, I'm sure, that this is not going to have any effect. It probably is just a story. But over time, Anthony had some incredible experiences, and he felt that there was something very dark attached to this doll, to the point where after a while he actually blamed the energy from the doll on the death of his dog that passed away. And Anthony did a lot of research on the doll and the history of it, and the various theories behind what could be haunting this doll, and he wrote a book of his own. And I interviewed Anthony a couple of times in the past for like my website and stuff, and he's very sincere and he takes it very seriously. And he did have a lot of people around him that felt like they'd been affected just by being in the doll's presence. There were nightmares. There was a series of bad luck, things that were attributed to the doll, or things that had happened only since the doll came into his possession. And it kind of culminated in Anthony taking Harold to the Mexican island of the dolls.
Oh right,
And
yeah, yeah,
there was
yeah,
a whole
yeah.
episode filmed, which was quite interesting, with Zach Bagans from Ghost Adventures. They filmed an episode on that island, just to kind of film the dolls, and they brought Harold there, and they did kind of like an investigation there, which was interesting. So
See,
um,
I was just going to say that one thing I've mentioned before is if you remove the doll from the situation and the dog dies, nobody thinks anything of it.
mhm.
Or if something weird happens, nobody really gives much credence to it. But then you put this doll that looks a little bit creepy in the situation, and then straight away people then attribute weird stuff to the doll. Was there anything particularly that made him convinced that the doll was the reason for these things happening and it wasn't just coincidence?
I think it was the culmination of things, because much like with some of the other cases I've seen, and some of the dolls that I've met myself since writing the book, I think it's always important to look at the whole picture. So I think if it was just a case of one or two like things happening, and you can kind of put that aside, but I think when you're looking at the picture as a whole, what has changed, what are the things that are happening, am I experiencing like personal effects of things that I've never had before? um and it's kind of looking at the picture as a whole. I mean, I've done my own investigation with a haunted object when I was writing the book, and I found it very important to not just rely on one kind of experience or one aspect of investigation. I thought it was important to look at the whole range of experiences and kind of let the bigger picture
Yeah.
kind of reach that conclusion, rather than saying like, oh, this one or two things have happened, therefore it must be the doll or something. I think it has to be something significant, and there has to be some kind of meat to the story, if you know what I mean, to give it that kind of credence. But with Anthony, like, it's hard to kind of put it in a nutshell, but in his book was fascinating, because he did have family and friends that felt very frightened because of things that were happening, and night terrors, nightmares, and just kind of this whole series of things that he felt quite distressed by it. And he's a lovely guy, very sort of rational, very, very, went into the situation half
Yeah.
expecting nothing to happen. So it's not something that you can necessarily kind of convince everybody with, but I do think there are cases out there with enough to it to kind of warrant some kind of serious looking at, really, in some respect to the case.
Am I right in thinking, therefore, then that Harold is still on the island of dolls in Mexico?
No, he wasn't left there. And the interesting thing is, and it's not something I want to get into too much, but I had a lot of contact with Anthony, who is still, as far as I know, Harold's owner. I was in contact with him for a long time, and we messaged each other, we emailed each other, and then all of a sudden nobody can find him online anymore, and nobody's been able to get hold of him. So if he's listening, or any of your listeners know Anthony, it would be lovely to hear from him and see what's happening now, because nobody can seem to get in touch, and it would be lovely to know how he's doing and if there are any updates on the case of this, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I mean, it might, to me, it would sound that, whether it's psychological or not, even if you leave the doll on that island, then therefore things you'd hope would come back to normal and resolve itself. But if it's still unresolved, then that's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah. So I think, as far as I know, the doll came back with him. I think Zach was quite interested in having the doll, as in his collection. But as far as I know, unless that changed, I think that Anthony is still the owner. So
Yeah, people are telling me to get rid of the picture of Harold because it's freaking them out. I may get rid of Harold, but I'm going to replace Harold with Letter, which is arguably worse.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better, does it, really?
I mean, Letter. Oh, I mean, not graced with the prettiest of faces.
No.
So, but yeah, in Australia, Letter's, probably the most famous haunted doll in Australia, I would say.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the story with Letter, and Letter has a nickname, Letter Me Out, kind of signifying this kind of energy that's kind of locked within the doll. So the story goes that a young lady called Kerry was going through some stuff in an empty house, like going through clearing a property of some kind, and discovered this doll. that was called Letter, or that she nicknamed Letter. The doll itself is actually really large. It's kind of like child size, and it's supposed to be 200 years old. And basically, when Kerry brought this doll home, she started to find that things were not as they should be. So she started to notice that things around the doll was moving, or that the doll was in a slightly different position than how she had left it. She felt like some things were just unexplainable, like events in the house since bringing it into her home.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that you know, a lot of us would, our instinct would be, you know, we've brought this thing home, we're noticing creepy things are happening, things are moving, we're hearing noises, we're having like bad dreams, things like this. Most of us would be quite keen to get rid of the item. But you know, up until, at least to the point where I was writing anyway, the reports are that Kerry kept hold of the doll and decided to keep Letter as a permanent residence. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see now, actually, if
Yeah,
if that
exactly.
activity still carries on. Yeah.
I know that Side Eye Guy and I think Amy's Crypt on YouTube had met Letter and things like that. People going, oh yeah, I remember when Seg met Letter and things. And I think idea as well that there's meant to be scuff marks from the shoes. You can see the shoes are pretty battered as well, all over the floors in this present. So
Yeah.
the idea that Letter's the one that's making these scuff marks as he, I think it's a he.
I think it's a he, yeah.
Walks around, yeah.
It's meant to kind of reminds me of what you said earlier in our conversation, when you said the whole idea of a doll moving around, isn't it? Like if the doll is able to move items, or is found in a different position, or there's evidence that it's been walking around, that just feels like a whole other level of terror, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, we'll do the last couple, and then we'll get on to people's questions. So we couldn't really not talk about Robert the doll. And like you mentioned before we came on air, really, that I think it was just the Robert the doll thing, and how that continues. You know, the whole mythology around Robert the doll it's not just, well, you can explain in terms of what people still believe about Robert the doll.
Yeah. So, you know, just to kind of recap the story, I'm sure most of your listeners will know anyway, but Robert is basically a sailor doll that was gifted to the child of a family. This we're going way back to the early 1900s, and this child had the doll, and he, you know, he loved it at first. You know, it's just a toy to him. You know, he played with it, but after a while, he started to go to his parents, saying that the doll was moving, that the doll could communicate with him, and was talking, and that he was really frightened and felt like there was like an energy, like a real kind of presence in the doll, and the child just became frightened, and he told his parents, and I'm not sure whether they believed or whether they were skeptical, but in the end they removed the doll, and eventually it was donated to a museum, which it still resides now, in Florida. So people can still visit the doll now. And what's interesting, and this is another thing that's similar to what I was mentioning with Peggy, is seeing something that's happening in current time, right? You know, kind of makes it extra kind of interesting to me, something that's happening now. So it's not just one of those things like Robert's a case where you can trace the roots to the past. You can actually see the reverberations in 2025. So he's in this museum, and the legend goes, or the story goes, that if you disrespect him when you're in his presence in the museum, or you take his photograph without asking permission first, that you will come away and you will experience a series of bad luck, and it will be from Robert, almost like a curse, I suppose. And this happens to the extent that it's not just one or two. There is actually confirmation from the museum that Robert receives letters frequently from visitors saying, look, we've come, we saw Robert, bad stuff has been happening, we feel like we disrespected him, or we didn't ask permission to take his picture, please tell him we're sorry, you know, we want to lift this kind of bad energy from us, or this curse. And they're kind of regularly receiving these messages today. So
I think that says so much more about people than it does the doll, actually. I mean, I've been to haunted locations where you can see where people have done very similar things. So I took this from the house, and you know, bad stuff started to happen, so I've given it back. This seems to be like a recurring thing, but particularly Robert the doll is absolutely focused on this whole thing around. You can see him surrounded by letters of people saying, please take away the curse, Robert. You know?
Yeah, and it's like it's very difficult, and I admit that. Like you're looking, as I was talking about earlier, you know, once you have that idea in your head, you have that bias to look for it. So
Yeah.
if you're aware of these stories and you go and visit Robert, and something bad happens, then there might be that link in your mind where you're thinking, I've heard this has happened to others. This is because of a curse. You know, I'm blaming the doll. So there is that element to it. But then there is also the possibility that if there is an energy to Robert, the fact that this happens so much could actually indicate that there is actually genuinely something to it. So it just depends which side of the coin you fall, really, with your belief system.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last one, and then we'll go on to people's questions.
Mhm.
This is one I've actually this star I did not know about. A Kiku or Kaiku. Do you want to say a little bit about this? Is it Japanese doll, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So I hope I get the pronunciation right, but yeah, I call her a Kiku. And this case goes back to 1918. There was a family in Japan, and this was their daughter's favorite doll. Basically, it was her favorite. She played with it. She was always with this doll, and unfortunately, she contracted an illness and she passed away. So, in something that's probably quite normal, the parents didn't want to just get rid of their daughter's things. You know, they cherish these things,
Yeah.
and one of the items they wanted to keep because it reminded them of their daughter was the doll. Um, so basically, they kept this doll and they kept it on like a little shelf, almost like a little shelf devoted to their daughter. There was pictures of her, and they situated the doll there as well. And what was noticeable to them was after a while they saw that the hair looked like it had grown, because the hair apparently started quite short. And after a while they noticed that it looked like the hair was growing. And this was a little bit unnerving to them at first. And they thought, you know, how is this happening? But, you know, time went on, and then they noticed even more so that the hair looked like it was longer, and they were thinking, how is this possible? And they thought, is there some kind of energy to this doll? Is our daughter making it happen?
Yeah.
Or is there some other kind of paranormal explanation, or some kind of spiritual thing, some kind of sign there? So eventually the parents didn't want to just kind of like let this doll um kind of disappear over time as they got older. They didn't want it to kind of be lost, and you know, they wanted to kind of preserve it because they felt like it was quite miraculous what was happening. So they actually donated it to a temple in Japan. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but they donated it to a temple in Japan, and the monks there said that they would care for the doll. And then after some time they actually got in contact with the parents again themselves and said, we've noticed it too, the hair has continued to grow, and that they couldn't explain why or how this is happening. So she's still there apparently in this temple, being cared for by the monks and kind of preserved and looked after. And that kind of phenomenon still apparently happens where the hair is growing. So what the reason for that is, people have never really understood, but it's quite an unusual case.
I suppose it's the only thing where where it has an actual explanation, whether it's to do with the plastic or whatever the doll's made from, and things like that, and it's just falling out over time.
Mhm.
At least it's measurable. If you want to take it that the actual hair growing longer is measurable. I suppose
Yeah,
some things are measurable to an extent.
yeah.
Okay, um, okay, so. We've kind of very, very quickly kind of tried to cover lots and lots of bases, but I'm going to give people a chance to ask you some questions now. So I'm going to just whiz through, go back to some of the questions that people have already been putting into the chat. And I'm just going to go back. Okay, I think this is one of the first ones I saw. There we go. Stu is saying, Fiona, have you heard of ventakers? I think that's the name, where ventriloquist dolls go when their owners die. Oh, Venta-Acres, is it? Some people might find it creepy, but I thought it was heartbreaking.
Funny enough, I haven't heard of that actually, and I'd love to learn more about that. I did write about the ventriloquist dummies in the film section of the book quite a bit, because there's a few film examples of it, and as I mentioned, it's always been an aspect of like dolls and puppets that I found really frightening, but I don't know about that specifically. So that would be something that you can help me. I can kind of take a deep dive down in afterwards, and that can be
Yeah.
something for the next book. Hopefully, it
I'll
sounds
say
interesting.
I've never heard of that either, actually. So that's a new one on me, Stu. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Roger saying, Fiona, addressing the Raggedy Ann doll in the room, do you honestly think the Annabelle doll was ever haunted, or was she simply invented by Ed Warren?
Um, I don't think she was just invented personally. I'm not going to say, I can't make that comment to say that everything that's been written about Annabelle is genuine, or that everything, all these kind of reports we've read, all the articles, all the rumors, all the myths, the documentaries, the interviews, it's been so huge. The story is so huge and has grown so massively that I honestly, like, hands up, I can't sit here and say this is all true. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm disregarding it all. As I mentioned earlier, I do think that there is a root truth to the account that there was an owner of this doll, Donna, and that she found it unsettling enough to reach out to a priest actually first, and it was the priest that suggested the connection, getting in contact with Ed and Lorraine. And I do think that there's seeds of truth to that experience, and that the story has grown from there. But yeah, I'm aware that it's a very controversial case, and opinions are widely divided, but it's a fascinating one.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadie's just saying, this is not a question, this comment. She's saying most dolls are loved, so they should be full of positive energy. And linked to that, there's this question from Stu saying, are there any nice haunted dolls? Why are they always seen as evil?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. It's something I'd love to address, actually. I think, much like with horror films, anything to do with the paranormal, our mind is drawn to something, and we have this kind of assumption that it's going to be dark and it's going to be demonic and it's going to be scary. And I don't think it's always the case. There are quite a number of cases in the book where there's nothing negative, that there is an indication of energy, but that not necessarily anything negative. And I actually think a lot of the experiences aren't necessarily negative as such, like a negative spirit. I think more than anything, it's a human being's response to the unknown for it to be interpreted that way. So I think, if you do have an item in your home and you suddenly think, actually, I've been hearing things, or things have been moving, then that's quite easy to make that assumption. Actually, this is scary, this is bad. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the intention of the energy, if there is one, to kind of give negativity. It could just be activity, and we're kind of understanding it in that way because it's something unknown, something scary, something we're not used to.
Rob K is saying, if they're just going to cover these super famous haunted dolls, ask Fiona about her own haunted dolls that she covers in her book. There we go, Fiona. Talk about the lesser known haunted dolls that you own.
Yes. So I do own a doll called Edna, and you can hear more of her story in a podcast called How Haunted by Rob Kirkup. And basically, when I was writing my book, Rob reached out to me and said, look, I recorded a podcast about this doll that I own. Do you want to own this, like have this doll for a while? The doll called Edna, have her, see if you experience anything, and you can write your own insight into the experience while you're writing the book. And I thought, what a great idea. So Rob had his own experiences while recording his show. He took Edna to a hotel and spent 2 nights basically locked in this hotel room trying to gather evidence about whether this doll was haunted or not. As far as I know, Rob was very skeptical at the beginning, but by the end he felt there was an indication that there was energy attached. So I was very excited about this, and I asked him to send Edna to me. And I have had some really interesting experiences, and even from early on when receiving her, like some of the stereotypical things that you hear about with ghosts, like that kind of the goosebumps, the cold spots, the cold feelings. There's been a few sightings of like shadow figures darting through the house, which I never had before. And interestingly enough, my husband, who is very skeptical about haunted objects in general, after bringing Edna in, he had that experience where he was alone in the house and saw something whiz past the door, to the extent that he got up and actually started.
Just bear with me just 1 minute. I think I don't know why my camera has gone off. So carry on talking. I'll just see if I can sort this out.
Yeah, no. So basically, my husband, who's a huge skeptic, had that experience himself. So he noticed like what seemed like a figure darting past the door, to the point where he thought someone's got in, and he got up and looked around the house. So he had that experience himself, which I found quite validating, because he didn't go into this with any perception of like believing that there was truth to a doll being haunted. And I did some other things as well, like EVP experiments. Like I asked Edna, how old are you? And I caught a childlike voice saying 6, confirming her age. And doing some experiments like using the touch sensor light balls and saying, if you can, if you're able to indicate your presence, can you touch this ball, and then the ball would light up. And I kind of had a series of these kind of things culminating in a really like interesting experiment, which I was able to write about in the book, and it continues now as well. And it's, you know, it's been really interesting, and it's kind of eye-opening to me, and it made me realize actually how much that our horror films like Chucky, Child's Play, Dolly
Yeah.
Dearest, and everything, I think almost that's what makes us shy away from trying to accept the reality of haunted dolls, is that we see it as so like such a caricature and so over the top and so dramatic, but actually it's not, and it can be as subtle and unnerving as a haunted house, if you know what I mean. It's not
Yeah.
as crazy. It's not like seeing a doll spinning its head and, you know, all this kind of crazy stuff. There's often kind of like a build up of very kind of validating experiences that are as just as convincing as what you would have in a house or any other place of investigation.
And has your husband changed his mind about the haunted doll since it arrived and started doing things?
I think he considered himself open-minded now, which is good. We have a lot of discussions about it. You know, when I first broached this whole subject and wanting to write the book, he was very much sort of like very full of like pretty much the polar opposite of where I was at, you know.
Yeah.
Like, but what about this? What about that? Doesn't this seem ridiculous to you? If a doll can be haunted, then does that mean a tea bag can be haunted? You know, he's very much sort of like,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
going down that avenue. Yeah, I get it.
sort of like he didn't take it seriously. But to me, that it was an interesting discussion. It didn't annoy me. I like the debate, and I like the discussion, and I'm aware that there's that opinion out there, if you know what I mean. So we have a lot of interesting discussions about it. But I think he's gone from a place of completely like non-belief to actually thinking, well, actually, you know, after having these experiences, he is open-minded, definitely,
Yeah.
from where he used to be. So
Okay, Wes from APRF. Good evening, Wes. Saying, hi, Justin and Fiona. Other than anthropomorphic objects like dolls, has Fiona heard of any other types of objects being allegedly possessed or haunted?
yes, I have, and that's been something that unexpected. I wasn't kind of planning on writing another book about the subject, but because I was spending so much of my time devoting to like reading haunted doll cases, just by natural connection, you then start to come across other things.
Yeah.
So I'm actually working on my second, it's very early stages, but I'm working on a second book at the minute about cursed and haunted objects in general. So rather than like an actual focus on dolls, it's going to look at the whole array of throughout history to modern day of various like cursed and haunted items and how they've become perceived to be that way. And yeah, there are all sorts of you know, artifacts and even like furniture and chairs. It's, you know, it's amazing when you really start researching like the amount of items there are where they have that kind of paranormal attribution, where people kind of suspect there's something to them, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on at the minute, is I'm taking a deep dive into the whole array of objects that can be haunted. And if any of your listeners have had experiences themselves, I would love to hear, actually, because it's wonderful to hear from people face to face, like their own accounts and experience of these things. So I'd love to learn more.
Absolutely. Kaz McDonald saying, is there any truth to the rumor that in the days before and even after photography, wealthy grieving parents would have dolls made in the image of their dead child?
Yeah, well, this is something that I touch upon in the book. I know in the Victorian era, there were supposed to be dolls made in the likeness of children who had passed, and they were called mourning dolls, I think. And it's really quite sad. But I think with the death rates back in the Victorian era, you know, the prevalence of like disease and infant death, there was quite a high mortality rate back then. And I think there was a tradition, but I don't know how common it was. But I do know that there was a tradition and that there exists these mourning dolls where somebody was commissioned to make a doll in the likeness of their deceased child, and that these would be perhaps placed during the church service or placed on the graveside as well. So there are examples of those in history, and it's, you know, it's quite a sad aspect of it, but very interesting too, from a historical point of view.
Absolutely. Mike's Mystery is saying, do you think dolls are presumed haunted because they look human?
I think there's a kind of two sides to that, really. I think that that's entirely possible. I think we find it easier to accept like a doll could be haunted more than a chair, for example, because of that human like aspect. You know, the eyes and the features, and it, you know, it's that kind of life and personality that we can imprint upon them. But on the other side of that, I also think that if energy and spirit does have the ability to link to an object, then it would make perfect sense that they would identify with something that looks distinctly human. So,
Yeah.
you know, it depends which flip side of that you want to look at. But I do think it makes sense in that way, or even from a kind of like a psychic imprint way. You know, if a doll was owned by a child, they absolutely loved it, they cherished it, they grew up with it, and then in adulthood they kept it on a shelf. It was a collector's item, they had it their entire life. It's entirely possible that some kind of energy was absorbed in that way as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are many theories really, but yeah, I see your point definitely.
There's a great one here from Brian saying, Fiona, are action figures dolls or not considered to be? Can my old Thundercats figures be haunted, or do the dolls have to be super ugly to be haunted? Also, you have pretty hair. Thanks, Brian.
Well, thanks for the hair comment. I think that if we're to open our mind to the idea that an object can be haunted, then I guess you could say that anything could potentially be haunted. I think our action figures hopefully are safe, but you never know, do you? So maybe just kind of keep an eye out if, you know, if there's any kind of untoward movement from your action figures at night.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, so it's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on a minute. Just I'm just going to quickly whiz through any last little questions. I know we're kind of like going to keep it to just to the album because I think we've got to finish on the hour. So just Sandra Peachy, thank you for becoming a member. So how lucky I well, very lucky indeed, obviously. Side Eye Guy's in. We can talk to Side Eye Guy about was it Letter because he met him. Well, he met him. I think it is.
Yeah.
It's a him. I keep on thinking it's a her because it looks like a her, but it's not. Last little thing. Oh, there we go. Urban Angel. We'll do this as the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Fiona, what's the scariest thing to have happened to you, either with dolls or not?
I think the creepiest experiences I've had is with so my own personal experiences that I've owned a doll called Edna, as I mentioned earlier, that there was some kind of creepy occurrences around. But the other item I own that I 100% believe is haunted, and he actually made headlines recently in the Daily Mirror, is my clown called Knock Knock Harry.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So his nickname's Knock Knock Harry, and I'm not a sensitive person. When I say that, I mean I don't have a gift. I'm not psychic. I'm not a medium. I don't claim to any of those gifts, and I've gone my whole life basically without sensing anything. But with Harry, since he was gifted to me from these two sisters, I felt it was palpable with Harry, with this particular clown doll, that there was just like a really strong feeling around him, felt very palpable. Quite often people mention feeling like they're watched when they're around him. Even I've at times had to turn his the figure around because it really feels like you're being watched. I've caught some creepy voices on EVP and spirit box sessions. There was one time I was trying to communicate with Edna, and then Harry's voice came through really angry sounding, saying, "It's not Edna, it's Harry." And he sounded really like domineering. And there was another time where I was trying to get Harry to talk, and I kept prompting him and getting nothing really on EVP, nothing on Spirit Box. And then I gave it one more go and I said, "Is there anything you'd like to say, Harry?" And he said, "Yes, bitch," like that. And he swore at me. And I was like, okay. So that really unsettled me, you know. He seemed to have a bit of an attitude, seemed quite domineering. I don't feel like he's negative, but I do feel like he's definitely strong, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Can be a bit unnerving, and I say that as somebody who's not I don't have any gift in that way, and yet I feel that around him, to the point where I have a lot of my collection of dolls and figurines in my bedroom, but I won't have him there. I keep him in a whole separate room. A lot of people feel uncomfortable around him. So I guess that if I had to say anything, it would be my experiences around Knock Knock Harry. So.
Fabulous. Yeah. Just before we finish, we've got to finish now. Just to remind people, this is Fiona's book. Please look into it. Obviously, I know that Lou, thank you so much for this evening, just been putting links for people if you wish to buy this book. So this is Fiona's book, from a cursed collection of haunted dolls, from real life to literature and movies. It's been absolutely fascinating. Whatever your views on haunted dolls, it's been a brilliant chat. Thank you so much, Fiona. Is there and I know again there's been lots of links during the chat, but if people are interested or they have their own experiences or things if they need to get in contact with you about anything they've experienced or may have a doll themselves or may want to kind of look into this further, how can they get hold of you?
Okay, so I am all over social media. So if you do look up Fiona Dodwell, author on X and Instagram and TikTok, I'm on all of those platforms. And if anyone reaches out on there, kind of give me a follow, and then they can kind of message me and let me know of their own experiences. That would be wonderful. And also, like, the book itself is available now, so it's called A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls. And if anyone reads the book and then just wants to share their own feedback or their feelings on it afterwards, I'd love to hear back from readers as well.
Absolutely. Phew. I think we just kind of try to squeeze like so much into 1 hour. It just has gone so quickly. Fiona, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
Like I said, I'm sure there'll be people's comments will it's just going to run because haunted dolls is such a divisive kind of subject.
It is, yeah. But
yeah,
no matter which side you fall on, it's just interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating, and it's such a, I don't know, it's something that really grips our imagination. So even if you're a skeptic, I think there's just something there that draws us to it as a theme and a subject. So.
Absolutely. Right, Fiona, I shall let you go. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been so enjoyable. Thank you so much for coming on. Like I say, and if you come out, bring up any paranormal books in the future, you're by all means come on back.
Okay, I'd love to. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for having me on. And it was lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Alex, enjoy the rest of the evening as well, won't you?
And you.
Thanks. Okay, right. That's everybody. Okay, just to before I disappear, again, thank you for those who are new members, and thank you to Kaza for the memberships as well. Thank you so much. Just to let you know, there's no tea party this Thursday, but this chap, the author of this book, is going to be on next Monday. So this is a book called Ghostland in Search of a Haunted Country. It's a bit of a highbrow book, this one. So Edward Parnell is the author of this book, and it kind of links in ghost stories, his experiences, and exploring and basically a journey around the UK, looking into the stories, the folklore, his experiences. It's like I say, it's a beautiful beautiful book. And so anyway, he is coming on to talk about why he is drawn to ghost stories and M.R. James ghost stories and the links to the the countryside, the UK. So that's who I've got on next Monday. Can you disappear sooner, please? Thanks, Seg. No, I can't. Actually, I'll stay a little bit longer just for you, just to wind you up. Kenny. Gits. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks, Seg. Appreciate it. Thanks for the love. Right. If you've enjoyed tonight, please do think about kind of liking, thumbs up, commenting, subscribing. Subscribing would be amazing. And yeah, just thank you for all the comments, all the chat, all the questions you gave to Fiona. I hope you enjoyed it this evening. And I shall see you again next Monday for more of the kind of same. And yeah, thank you guys. And I shall see you next week. All right. Good night. Bye-bye.